Welcome back to the channel, Crypto Trend Trader, with a quick update on Bitcoin. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you it's not financial advice. I'm not your financial advisor. These markets are extremely volatile, so please do your own research and trade responsibly. We got Bitcoin daily on the Coinbase chart. Basically, getting ready to wrap up this week, and not a lot has happened in these last few days. It's been extremely quiet in the space as far as analysts and as far as movement. Price has been just slowly kind of creeping around inside this zone. I'm going to take it down here. And because there hasn't been a lot of action, it's been very quiet. People can't jump on and talk about nothing after it happens. They got to wait till something happens. So I wanted to get on here before this next big move and make sure everybody sees it coming so that you're on the right side of it. So even on like the smaller time frames, this situation in here is looking like real choppy, and I know people are having trouble identifying it and taking into account like the different fib levels and everything. It's very clear to us though that we're basically eating up all the sell orders at these fib levels. It's the 382 and the 0.5, and essentially you can see the purple and blue and how much we've been interacting with those next levels. And if you look right here, they both correspond like almost perfectly at this like 7800 range. And then on the lower side, you've got them at 65.65 and 62.37 respectively, and you can see how much they've interacted with them. So if we're going to interact with them again, it would be at that level to the downside, or if we're going to interact with them on the upside, it's going to be right up here where they correspond at 96.44. They basically come back in together again almost perfectly on the top side here, and that also comes into line with our diagonal yellow parabolic trend line that we broke down from that last capitulation. So that would essentially be like the capitulation down from it, below the green parabolic trend line. Then we find support, move all the way back up, test the yellow parabolic trend line that we broke down from, also test the 618 of the purple fib and the 236 of the blue fib, which also corresponds to the top of the all-time high 20,000, 14,000 top, and then this previous like push up top here, red diagonal descending resistance line. So we have a bunch of resistance all lined up right here in this exact spot, like perfectly, which gives me like a very high likelihood I think that we could get that test up there. Now also inside of this move, after that little mini capitulation, we had that blue parabolic trend line, moved up on that, found support, broke down from it, didn't quite make it back up to retest, and then we started forming this green one here, a little less intense, found support, broke down from it, retest, and now here we are still retesting on it, slowly creeping up with it, as it essentially like broadens. We're ascending, we're going up, and it's getting like a bigger range inside of here. So if we continue to move along in between this green parabolic slope line and the yellow parabolic slope line that we're forming, that would line up perfectly with all those fibs and all those previous like resistance and support lines as well. And then this is real choppy, and it's hard to like identify as far as like Elliott wave or what's potentially going to happen here. But when we broke down from this diagonal resistance that was like kind of stopping us up here previously, and that was like our initial descending broadening wedge like distribution pattern before the dump, now here we are breaking through it after like multiple attempts, and we're essentially eating through all these different sell orders. And I think what's likely to happen is we're going to keep consolidating here at the top of the range, and then finally we're going to break through it and get that big move up here to like 9,700 or whatever, 96.75. It's looking more and more likely. And now again, I'm talking about how choppy this is and how hard it is to identify it, and I don't like to use like a ton of fractals, but at times they can be useful, because algorithms and bots like often move the market in like similar ways. So you can kind of see, if we take our little fractal pattern, and this one was like very clear and perfect and like concise, if we kind of move that over here and kind of look at this a little bit and see how does this sort of line up with the movement that we've had previously. It's not going to be perfect, but essentially you can kind of see like a first wave in here, a third wave in here, and then you would potentially get the fifth wave in here. And now again, it's not going to be perfect, and this isn't like something that you can necessarily trade off of like clearly identifying a pattern or anything like that, but it helps you obviously to see like visually how like a bot or an algorithm is potentially like moving this in that same pattern, but it's extremely choppy, so it's less identifiable. But essentially what it looks like to me is it looks like something basically like where you have like a 1 come through here, either 1, 2, 3, and it's all choppy through here, and then the retrace 4 come up in here, 5, something like that. But I mean, essentially it looks a little more identifiable if this was just like that never-ending like waterfall of stop loss, like, you know, cascading down, and then finally they like cut off BitMEX so it stops and it's able to like, you know, catch itself like more realistically. This would be like a over, you know, over reaction basically. But essentially you would get like the 1, 2, and then the 3 in this area, 4. So this part's like real choppy and like can't really identify any of it. But I mean, when you look at the actual size of the pattern and then you look at like, you know, the corresponding levels and what's identifiable in this situation, I think it's very likely that we're going to come up here. Now, is it possible that we come down first? Yeah, definitely. I mean, staying inside of all this, we could come down as low as like 69.80, dump right at like the end of the day, end of the week, you know, and then get our close like down in here, you know, at that 7,000, and then get our move back up and continue to like oscillate inside this range until we do get to that level there. You know, I think that definitely has a high likelihood of happening, or you know, potential, I should say. I definitely don't want to like rule it out at this point in time, but you know, there's not a lot of like definitive price action that's making this clear, and a lot of the altcoins are just kind of creeping up, which, you know, that can be interpreted in many ways. A lot of times that will happen, you know, before a big breakout, and a lot of times that will happen like at the end of a trend. So you know, it can mean literally like two complete opposite things. Because it could be like the altcoins basically breaking through their resistance like that corresponds to Bitcoin before it happening, and then Bitcoin follows, or it could be the opposite where, you know, they basically like false breakout and then Bitcoin dumps and then they just dump. Um, but you know, it's very clear on this chart how much we've been interacting with the blue right here, and then also the purple fib level as well. So I think it's very likely that we're going to continue interacting with them as well. So you know, here we are basically at the purple and at the blue. This is the high likelihood area that we would top out and then like sell off to like gain strength before we can get like our next big move to the top. And then also like if you try to do like you know, some fibs inside of this area and start looking at fib retracements, if you count like this point right here as the top, we basically got like the 618 retracement. If you count right in here as the top, you know, we basically got like a 236, almost 382 retracement. So that could be possible. And then if you like went from there and counted in here, that would basically be like a 0.5 retracement in there if you counted that as the top. If you went in here, we could come down as low as like the 618 would be right here at the 6400 range. So we could basically come down there and then come all the way back up. So I think 6400 to the downside is very likely, and we would likely find support right there. But it could stop as high as 6540. But this area right here is definitely like, it's definitely the area I'm looking to get buys in if we do get a pullback into here. And then as far as like sells to the upside, where I think this is going to be topping out, it's looking more and more likely. Obviously, right now, you know, where we're at, we could top out. So I'll just put a little one right here. But typically, the longer you consolidate at a support or resistance, the more likely you are to break that support or resistance. So at this point in time, I would say the most likely area we're gonna like top out, like the you know, the trend currently is up in this area. And you know that, you know, it seems like this was just some violent, like massive move and everything, but when it's all said and done, all we are is basically like this is just a very strong support level. You know, we consolidate on top and then we spend a little time above it, consolidate back at it, spend a little time above it, spend a little time below it, consolidate at it, a little bit above it, sell back down through it. It seems like the end of the world, but now here we are just kind of leveling out in the same area. So at this point in time, I think like, basically like this is like the safety zone that Bitcoin's just kind of falling back to. So it's very likely that we could get a move up from here. It's very likely we could get a move down from here, but I would bet with almost certainty that we'll be revisiting this area, sometime in the next few months, no matter where we go from this, whether you're bullish or whether you're bearish, whether you think it's the end of the world or the beginning of the world for Bitcoin. Um, I think that it's very likely that we're going to end up right here in this same range, 3 months or 6 months or a year from now, and the way this is all shaping up on the macro, 6,200 would be the range to the downside, and you could say like to the upside, 9,600 is like the range, but this is where Bitcoin's spending most of the time, and this is where most of the volume's coming in as far as like trading overall and everything. But in all reality, we're basically in the middle of this range right here. If you're gonna say like 6,000 to like 9,000 is the range, we're right smack in the middle. So I mean, depending how you look at it, this is either the best place to take a trade or the worst. I mean, I don't like taking trades in the middle of a range, especially if I'm not clear on which direction it's getting ready to go. I like to take like shorts at the top of the range, which would be, you know, over 9,000, and I like to take longs at the bottom of the range, which would basically be like 6,000. So, I'm not really interested in any kind of like substantial position from this area, even though it is like a pivot on the market. It is like the pivot in the middle of the range, so it's like the least decisive, point for me to trade. So I'm just kind of looking at that. That's just a basically like a realization in the broad thing. So I think that's very likely what we're looking to see happen here in the near future. And while there's not a bunch of action going on like currently, this is typically like what happens right before the big move. Everybody stops paying attention because nothing's been happening for a few days or a few weeks or whatever, and then all of a sudden you get that massive move. And especially coming up on the end of the week here, paying attention to where like CME's closed on Friday. I think there's likely going to be like a lot of volatility today in the next. We're coming up on the noon candle, and then we'll have like two more after that before the daily close on the 4 hour. I should say two more 4 hour candles. So really, there's three for the day. One's coming in soon, so I would expect us probably, to get quite a bit of action and hopefully some tradable volatility. I am currently uncovered or out of my positions, I should say. I was in some shorts on that initial pop up, but basically, like we sold off and then just consolidated, and so I took profits. There was no reason to basically just like hold a position in a range that we're oscillating in. Just because it was in profit, so I did go ahead and close that out. So basically, I have no substantial positions open at this time. I obviously have like some permanent like hold positions on crypto, but I'm currently out of my shorts and everything. Now it doesn't mean I won't re-enter my shorts if I do see the opportunity arise. I think it's very likely that honestly, when this trend does top out, I think Ethereum's going to get wrecked because Ethereum has been like extremely bearish throughout like all this downtrend over the last few years, and then over the last couple months, extremely bullish relative to like Bitcoin and other cryptos. And I think that is a mistake on whoever's part. So I think or maybe not, maybe they're just trying to like build it back up to create some liquidity so they can escape a position. I don't know. But I think it's very likely that when this situation all tops out or retraces, if you are bullish and we're going to continue to the upside, when we do get that substantial retracement, I have a feeling that Ethereum is going to get wrecked. And if you pay attention to something like Litecoin's been like pretty bearish through all this, and like much less, it's been like much less, intense to the upside. So when it does get a move, it just sort of gets like a little lazy pop up. But when it gets a sell off, like it's selling off like stronger and faster than Bitcoin and most other cryptos. So Ethereum is like the opposite of that. The second it sells off, it's getting bought up, and when it pops bigger. So what I'm expecting is when that bubble literally does pop on Ethereum, I think it's going to be a massive sell off. So I'm looking forward to that, and the potential shorts and gaining a substantial position long term out of this move that I see coming up. So quite a bit of action happening in the charts, lots of excitement, and I'm definitely looking to take advantage of it. But there's been crazy amounts of volatility lately, so this little like dead zone where there hasn't been much happening, there's no reason to like go crazy taking positions or to get greedy with high leverage or anything like that. I'm definitely seeing a lot of the analysts and quote unquote traders in the space kind of come unraveled at the seams. I don't know if it's like from the lockdown or lack of volatility or lack of money coming in. I'm sure a lot of people are struggling in this situation. Short term, I know some people are getting like, quick little cash or whatever, assistance, unemployment, whatever, but please just spend that money wisely or save it or use it to pay down like high interest debt that you have or to pay off like real assets that you have. Don't be reckless with this money in this time because it can dry up very quickly. And we're seeing like initial hyperinflation right now, but I think likely we're going to see like long term deflation as like I said, this little like liquidity and stimulus and everything dries up, because this stuff that they're doing right now is not like long-term fixes. And the psychology of people has been changed through like this virus event and everything like that, and the way we interact socially and the way we spend our money and our time and everything like that is going to change. It has already changed, and habits start to form after like 30, 60, 90 days. So we're basically being like conditioned, whether we realize it or not, whether it's intentional or not. Like we're basically being conditioned for like permanent change over time. And I'm still very skeptical about how this has all played out. Uh, the Chinese Communist Party does not have respect for life in the same way that most countries or governments do. Not to mention, like, most countries and governments sort of have like that greater good mentality where they would sacrifice few for the good of many. So this whole situation, again, does not make sense to me. If this virus is not as dangerous as it is, then the devastation to the economy cannot have been worth it unless it was like intentional to sabotage like the world economy for someone or some things benefit, which is like a deep conspiracy theory. The other end of it is that it's just not as bad as what they thought it was, and all this mitigation worked, and everything's great and everything. In which case, like you'd think they want to get everybody back out and working and going as quickly as possible. But then, like it's going to look terrible for all the leaders that essentially like crash the world's economy like unnecessarily to prevent these lack of lives. And then people are going to sit here and say, "Well, I don't even like know people who died, and you guys did all this, and it was unnecessary, and before that things were good, and now they're bad, so off with your heads or get out of here or whatever." So I think this is a very strange situation because we're not seeing like the resolution that we would have expected to see. We would expected to see like a lot. I'm not trying to like downplay it, but I would have expected to see like a lot more devastation at this point in time, or else you know it seems like this was all like an overreaction to something that was like far less dangerous than we should have taken into account. So we'll see. I don't know. It's very crazy because when you start looking at the statistics and everything, and you think like, okay, we've had like 60,000 deaths, or there's been like 100,000 worldwide, or whatever the numbers are right now. When you take into account like the amount of less people that's died from shootings or car accidents, or fell off a roller coaster or got eaten by an alligator, like just the overall amount of deaths that we've had is like way down from all this stuff, and from essentially like people just being like less active and more contained. But long term we could see like a lot more deaths from like poverty and depression and social anxiety after all this pans back out. And there's just like so many like immeasurable factors that we just can't take into account. And the fact of the matter is that no matter what, like the world has changed, and a lot of things that were successful and existed and thriving before will go away, and a lot of things that were non-existent or going away or not profitable before will begin to thrive. And it's important that you don't just go back to the old way, because those people are going to fail. The ones that just try to go back to doing what they were doing and just try to like open the doors back up and just have their business go back to usual and just hope that with a little less business or a little less customers or whatever it is that they're just going to be able to like make ends meet. That's not the case. because you have to look at the relationship between like the amount of overall business like market share in that goes away, and you know, how you're gonna like capture the additional. So if 50% of like restaurant business goes away, you know what I mean, you have to essentially, you know, increase your own by more than the competition disappeared by and the business decreased by. So you have to make sure that your net business is going to be more, or else like your fixed costs, operating costs, and stuff like that, like rent and, you know, mortgages and equipment and stuff like that, is going to bankrupt whatever your business is, because you're not going to be able to make you're not going to be able to make do with those fixed costs. Like the overhead itself is just going to crush most businesses if they take any kind of hit to their like overall like economic model or sales model, or you know, whatever their like business model basically. So I think it's very likely that you know, people are going to underestimate this, and that's going to be like the great transfer of wealth. I'm already seeing it happen as people get like their, you know, stimulus or like quick cash or whatever, and just hurry to like spend it on dumb things rather than using it to pay down debt or save with anticipation, because this is all going to get a lot worse one way or another. You know, this is not just going to play out like in a couple months. I mean, most places have been on lockdown for like 30 to 60 days at this point in time. Like the economy crashed a couple months ago. The virus got here a few months ago. The stock market crashed a few months ago. Like it hasn't been that long. Everybody's talking about how we're in a recession or a depression, but how like it's just going to go back to normal now. Well, it's one or the other. You either admit we're in a recession or depression, or you know, acknowledge we're in a recession or depression, and this is going to go on for years, like 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. We're going to see lasting effects of stuff like this. So you either admit that, acknowledge that, or you say we're not in a recession or depression, and that the Fed and monetary policy and, you know, all the governments around the world and everything are going to succeed and essentially stop that from happening. But you can't have both. You don't get your cake and eat it too. Like there's either recession and they fail to stop it, or depression, they fail to stop it, or they succeed in stopping it or prolonging it, and we just go about like, you know, for a few more years or whatever in the meantime. But you don't get both. We don't go into a recession or depression and then just come back out 6 months later or 3 months later or whatever. Not with the black swan event, not with the virus, not with all this stuff going on. None of that makes any sense. So, and we'll do like another like in-depth reflection video, and maybe get into a little bit of this and how things are going to change. And you know, maybe I can get into a little bit of you know, emerging markets, or where I think like the world economy is going to go, and how to position yourself like financially and everything to basically like profit off this situation. And I'm not talking about like trading and stuff like that. I'm talking about like legitimately like positioning yourself for like successful business, you know, and going from basically being like an employee to essentially like a business owner in the future. So, but in the meantime, I'm going to get out of here for today. Crypto trend trader, a little bit of our technical analysis, and we'll see where our daily candle closes, and I'll be back with an update. If not tonight, then definitely our Monday crypto update and traditional analysis. So, crypto trend trader, and I'm out of here.